Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Brunel Cup of Science. I hope everyone has the essential accessory, your cup of coffee, cup of tea. And let me welcome today Jim Dawton. Thank you very much, Jim, for being here. Jim is director of Impeller Ventures and is also now the new Brunel Joker in residence. And I shouldn't say new because this is the first time Brunel has such a role. And I think I'm very pleased to have you here today. It's going to be a very disruptive, very contrarian session. And I had a very good night's sleep, so I hope I'm ready to deal with the questions I have to ask you. So this is the first slide I have for you. This is taken from your LinkedIn profile. Again, director of Impeller Ventures, an innovation company. And your background is design for industry, and you studied that at Newcastle. Mm-hmm. Now, straight away, when I prepared the interview with you Monday evening, I could feel that I was myself pushed in my boundaries. And usually I start with an anecdote. A fun story about you, and I think that is what I'm going to tell today. Is that the first question I asked you over the phone, you actually told me, well, I don't think this is a good question, and if you were to ask me that question on Wednesday, I wouldn't actually want to ask it to answer it. So boom, that is, you know, as an interviewer, this is the sort of thing you don't want to hear. And yes, it actually pushes you to think about how can you make the dialogue work? Do you have to use more empathy? And that is a word that we are going to define today, and Jim is going to elaborate on that. But that actually reminded me, and we are not here to talk about me today, but just a quick example of how important it is to shake up what your thoughts and to think outside of the box. Again, I'm sure a concept that Jim is going to talk about today. I once interviewed for a grant proposal for a fellowship, and the first time I interviewed, I didn't get it. And what actually happened is that I had to make a small presentation, which was fine, but then the panel members were asking me questions, and they pushed me all over in every corner, and I definitely was not ready. And I felt metaphor very naked in the room. I wasn't ready. And I think we all need to talk, to be pushed in our boundaries, and I very much welcome Jim at Brunel, because this is very important for innovation. And again, another keyword that we are going to elaborate on today. The second time I went for the interview, I actually got it, and I think it was a very constructive effort and experience for me to be shaken at the first interview. It certainly allowed me to grow. Good. Now, I hope Poll Everywhere is going to work. This is the first question for you, and it looks like it's working on my side. I'm asking you whether you know what the concept of a joker in residence is. And it looks like I'll give you some time to answer. Most of you do, or now we are half-half, which is great. Maybe I don't have to ask you questions anymore.
I was going to say, that's it. I can go and do some other stuff.
I'll actually check this, the next question. All right, so it looks like people may have a fair idea. Of course, my introduction may have biased this.
Well, Abdul on the chat says he read about it before the presentation today when it was announced last week, smiley face.
Right, so it looks like we are not starting from scratch, which is good. Now, I want to know if you are telling me the truth. So please, one word, a couple of words that best captures what you think the role of a joker in residence is. Mind you, this was the first question I asked Jim over the phone, and he told me that's not the question you should ask me.
Well, in fairness, maybe I have a bad memory, but my recollection was that you asked me, maybe you did, but you certainly asked me what I was looking forward to or excited about joining Brunel. So something like, why have you joined Brunel and what are you excited about?
Why, yes, why, what is going to be your joker? What do you think your joker in residence role is going to look like?
You definitely didn't ask that one, but
well, I smartened up since then.
Okay.
You already biased me.
Okay.
Good, disruptive, innovative.
So I can't see the answers on my screen, so you'll have to tell me what the answers are to this question.
All right. So
on the poll.
Yeah, the poll is live, so it should be. Do you see my PowerPoint?
Yeah, I see your PowerPoint, so I see the question, but okay. Don't think the answers are coming up.
Oh well, I hope people can see this. I have disruptive, encourage, thinking, ensure, differently, innovative, research,
okay.
Help, disruptive, yeah, differently, think differently, and differently is the largest word so far.
Okay. So if I was typing that one.
And I'll actually, yes, ideas provoke, keeps coming in. Let's give a few more minutes, well, a few more seconds. Disruptor, constructive, colleagues, discussions. Well, it's the main words so far are differently and disruptive.
Interesting.
And I'll go to the, I think that captures it differently, disruptive, innovative, constructive, colleagues, ideas provoke. Indirectly, that's interesting. Behind the scenes. Good, and I have one last slide here. Do you see this slide, Jim?
Yeah.
I've been stealing this from your LinkedIn, I hope you don't mind. And this is a talk you've done at a university here in London, UCL, not to name it. And I really like this, your title, Important Innovation. And that's going to be a question. How can us academics, how can we improve our innovation skills? And I certainly liked the blue pill out there and the word important innovation. So I think this is going to be a question. Now, I'll stop sharing so that we can all see each other. Good. Are we all here? Yes. So my first question for you, Jim, is perhaps, yes, what do you think? You seem to wanted to answer that question first. And what is the role of a joker in residence? And how do you see your role here at Brunel University? That's a big question, but let's try to frame it.
Yeah. So the reality is I haven't got a clue what the role is. But the best context that we have for a role like this is the medieval court.
So tell us a little bit more about, yes, this history of the word joker or fool or jester, and the king's fool.
So as far as I can understand from the history books, the medieval courts had pretty much unanimously, I think, I'm not sure about that actually, a lot of medieval courts had a fool. And probably the best way of understanding the fool, I think, is to look at or listen or read Shakespeare's King Lear. And you get a good indication of the relationship between the king and the fool and what the fool achieves without doing anything. Eventually the king realizes that he's misunderstood the reality. He thought that his three daughters' behavior were almost the opposite of what it really was. And the fool over time allowed the king to work that out for himself without actually doing anything.
Hence, I thought the word indirectly that was indicated in the cloud was interesting, because you've just mentioned the king wasn't aware of it.
Yeah, and so this is an interesting one, because most of our most of how we function as organizations, as individuals, it's all very empirical. But actually, most of the way our brain works isn't. It's actually subconscious, it's intuitive, it's creative, and we're happy with that in certain areas of our society.
Mm-hmm.
So we're pretty happy with an artist or a musician having a bit of an epiphany, and there's plenty of examples of musicians who in a dream, or they wake up and they hear a piece of music, it's all complete. I've been watching various bits of documentaries over the last few weeks, just coincidentally. There's one with Fleetwood Mac, one of their top songs, I think. The composer, there's the two females, the American woman and the British woman, I've forgotten the names. And the British woman was the composer. She woke up in a hotel room while they were recording somewhere, sort of mid-recording. Unusually for her, she had the whole thing. She had the tune, the melody, the lyrics, the whole thing was in her head. She didn't have the opportunity to record it because there was no facilities in the whole hotel room. So she kept herself awake and kept that tune playing in her head. And then at a certain time in the morning when the studio would be open, she, with the tune still playing in her head, walked down the road into the studio and then recorded it. And that was it. The whole thing was done. I was seeing a bit of a documentary about Simon and Garfunkel. Many will know their classic, probably most famous song, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, where Paul Simon basically describes this as there was a moment when the song didn't exist, and then there was a moment when the song existed.
Right.
So if we were setting up a research program or a project or something funded, and we were going to try to create a piece of music of the genre and quality of Bridge Over Troubled Waters, we would write a proposal about all sorts of activities, all sorts of research, all sorts of co-creation, workshops, getting people in, testing it with consumers, modifying it, MVPs. We do all of this stuff to get to this near, perfect if possible pop song. But that's not how it was created. There was a moment it didn't exist, and there was a moment it existed. And the video I was watching, he was lying on a bed playing a guitar. I mean, I'm sure that's slightly staged, but if you're a jazz fan, Brad Meldau recently, a couple of years ago, recorded an album called Seymour Reads the US Constitution. Same thing, dream, in the dream, weird things happening, bang, there it is, done. So that's very normal, but we don't like that in normal life. I say normal life, I mean the serious bits of life,
Mm-hmm.
the corporate bits of life, the organizational bits of life, the empirical bits of life. You can't just not have something 1 second and then the next second have it all finished. And so there's this real problem that we've got, that we've become so we basically turned into machines.
And do we think that we have to prepare everything for a long time? What you are going to is what you are talking about now is that genius, and this song that you mentioned, it comes instantaneously. There is nothing, and then we have a song.
Mm-hmm.
And that research idea, the best are always, the shortest, the very simple. So this research maybe is instantaneous. If it's not there as a spark, and if you have to build it, and if it's very intricate, is that a good idea?
I'm not sure what the question is. Sorry, you'll have to find that one.
That I'm saying that often you wake up with that research idea in your mind.
Okay, an idea.
There was no idea.
No. So an idea is a long, long way away from the solution, the finished article. It's not you wake up with a research idea, it's you wake up with the research finished and its conclusions reported. Well, hang on a minute. That's going to cost us £3 million and take 3 years with a big team. It's impossible to finish that. Well, it's possible if you're writing a song that becomes famous around the world, but it's not possible if you're a scientist doing science. But I think largely it's not possible because we've told ourselves it's not possible. But there's this big difference between this sort of what is imagined and what is manifested. And so the way I describe it is that if you imagine 3 points in a line, and if you like, let's call it a problem, a solution, and a problem solved, i.e. the solution delivered into the real world, which goes on to solve the problem. And let's say the problem is obesity. And we have a solution that will solve obesity. Well, that's got to happen at a population level. Because even if it happens in 1 person, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, you've not actually solved the problem of obesity. You've just dealt with it in a few people. And so to get from that solution to the problem solved, that's physical world stuff, and it's hard work. It's not necessarily difficult. So digging my garden is not difficult, but it is hard work. And we kind of confuse those two things. And I think in academia, we quite like the difficult, but we don't like the hard work quite so much. The bit between the problem and the solution, well, this is where most of our developed world activity sits. It's where a lot of academic work sits, pretty much all of it, I would say. My background, design used to be here, and it's moved to here. Because you haven't got to deliver anything in the real world. And actually, everybody's really quite excited about trying to to come up with a solution to a problem. And so we spend all of our energy and all of our money and our intelligence and creativity and resource here, which means very little actually gets achieved in the real world, which is why productivity didn't change, which is why we don't deal with climate change, which is why we don't deal with all these sorts of things, because we're all focused here. Of course, there are some people that shift to here, and the Chinese have been leading the way in recent decades. Americans did it for a good time, still doing the same thing. The Japanese held the mantle for a while. Historically, Brunel's era, Great Britain, was all about delivering real things into the real world to change the real world. Of course, they were solving problems, but there wasn't much activity here because the solutions came really, really fast. This is where they put their energy. But now we've decided that this is what it's all about.
Right. So about the real world and how to have this genius, this bright idea that is going to be funded. We talked about desirability. And so what is desirable is what is going to have a direct impact on the real world. But how do we know that?
So I'm going to correct you again. This is not about ideas. This is about solutions. Finished articles. Desirability is fundamental in a solution that requires human beings, because we basically do things that we're attracted to. The other important element is usability. And those two realities of desirability and usability are the definition of design, in my opinion. That's it. And so the designer, by the way, no other designers agree with that definition. They want to make it far more complex. The designer, in my opinion, is the expert of desirability and usability. Now, the problem is you get those two things for free.
How do you feel those as a designer? You get these for free.
You get them for free just because you've built something. And so let's imagine we decide to go into business charging people to go up a tower to look at the view. So we need to work out what the viability of all of that will be, how much it will cost to build the tower, how much we're going to sell the tickets for, how much profit we make, and when we, so that's the viability. And then there's the feasibility issue, which is we've got to build a tower. So who do we go to from a feasibility issue to build a tower? We go to an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, look, we've worked out what the viability model is, the business case, and we need a tower. But we haven't got much money at the moment, so it's all down to you, engineer, to build the tower. So he says, that's fine. So anyway, the tower's finished, and then we all stand back and have a look at this tower, and some people start to gather, and we ask some people on the left, what do you think of our tower? So I love it. You ask some people on the right, what do you think of our tower? I hate it. You ask some other people, they say, I didn't even notice your tower, sorry. Mm-hmm. And so you've now got a measure of desirability. I love it, I hate it. And then we say, well, look, if you go up the tower, you can see over the horizon, it's going to cost you this amount of money, buy the ticket and pop up. So they buy the ticket, they get to the bottom of the tower and they look around and there's no lift. So we say to the engineer, why isn't there a lift? Well, there wasn't much budget. Don't worry, I'm an engineer, I've solved the problem. In fact, it's a really clever solution. So they look around, there's no staircase. Right? No money, same thing. What the engineer has done, clever piece of engineering, he's built the structure of the tower just close enough so that an average human being can climb up it like a kid going up a climbing frame. Now, we all loved going up climbing frames. He remembered when he did it, so that was all good. And there are some people that buy a ticket that absolutely love that experience, but most don't. Mm-hmm. So it's now not very usable, but because it's not usable, they don't like it. So desirability and usability are fundamentally linked in the realm of design. Now, the question you asked me is, how do you know what's desirable?
How can you get into people's mind?
Because that is my expertise. Mm-hmm. Well, this is really weird. Did you not go and ask them? No, I didn't go and ask them. So if I was a musician and I had a great reputation for composing music, whether it's classical, whether it's pop genre or whatever, Adele's just brought out a new album. Do you think Adele went and asked everybody what they wanted in the next single and co-created with them and had lots of workshops? And I doubt it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because she, to use the word you're using a few times, she's a genius. She just knows, not because she's consciously said, what can I record that I know they're going to like? It's just, I'll just do this because it's right.
And she didn't make a survey. She didn't ask her audience.
I'm assuming.
What you like, right? Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming. Mm-hmm. And so, and we're comfortable with that with Adele, but we're not comfortable with that in the design school, how we teach designers. We're not comfortable with that in our research. And so the role of the joker, it's a complex role, but it's a really simple role. Well, how can that be? Because we get confused about. So Uber, the car hailing app, it's really simple. Boy, is it complex behind the scene. Mm-hmm. Now, if it was the other way around, if it was really simple behind the scenes, which made it incredibly complex to use, it would be a complete failure. And increasingly in our realities, things are increasingly complex. And so you need complexity to deliver simplicity. The delivery of simplicity is very much in the realm of design. Mm-hmm. But the problem is there are very few people who are interested in complexity behind the scenes, because we've created a sort of specialist culture of finite entities. And I haven't read it, it's on my reading list, but I heard a guy give a talk and he cited the book, so I'm assuming this is roughly where it goes, James Carsey's book, Finite and Infinite Gains, where we've created basically a culture of finite. Everything needs to be packaged up and complete and You know, you've finished your education, you've finished your exam, you've finished your stage gate, you've finished your project, you've finished your report. If you're a management consultant, you have on the back of your t-shirt when you run a marathon, I'm a finisher. And we reward people for finishing things.
Mm-hmm.
And yet in this guy's talk, he is beautifully, provocatively entitled Wasting Genius, the talk. He says there's a different type of person who is not a finite, doesn't fit well in this finite world, sits much more comfortably in the infinite world. Now, I sort of took some of that thinking and applied it to wicked problems. Now, my paraphrase of the definition of a wicked problem is something just so complex and variable, you'll never solve it. Hence, wicked problem. Well, that would stand up as an argument from a finite perspective. However, if you look at that from an infinite perspective, you can solve a wicked problem tomorrow, and then the next day, and then the next day. But we don't like that in our medieval courts of academia and all sorts of stuff. Everything needs to be packaged up because that's how we get the funding, that's how we finish it, and all this sort of stuff. And so the role of the joker is to sort of introduce an infinite perspective. The role of the fool in the medieval court, back to your earlier question, was, and the original fools in medieval courts often had a physical peculiarity or abnormality, maybe is a better way to put it, often midgets, but perfectly proportioned midgets. I've not read this explicitly, but my interpretation is that I sense that they could maybe be on the, as we would call it now, on the autistic spectrum. That they found it very hard to deal with everyday life, and that they required a guardian to look after them in the medieval court. And we know that because the ledgers say basically all the expenses, shirt for fool. Now the ledgers with the original fools was 2 shirts for the fool. Now a shirt was a year's wages back then. You would not buy 2 shirts for a fool, one person. But the original fool was actually 2 people. The fool and somebody looking after the fool.
That's very interesting.
Now, then you got people in the court who were a bit put out by the fact that the fool had the ear of the king and could speak the truth to the king. Why did the fool speak the truth? Because if they were, well, it was not necessarily the truth, but it was not an interpretation of something. It was a literal. So the autistic spectrum person in a certain area often just takes things very literally, which makes them really socially embarrassing. And so people in the court who were not in that character type recognized what they were doing, and then over the years started to play the fool, which is where we get the expression. So then you have what the historians call the artificial fool. And we know that because the ledgers only have 1 shirt bought for the fool.
Right.
Then these clever people, if I can put it that way, who could turn on the ability to speak straight to the king, truth, which was not a word that came up in the list of what's the joker and resonance role, discovered that actually the king didn't really like hearing the truth. The king knew the importance, which is why the king offered the patronage to the fool, because everybody in the court would only tell the king what they thought the king should hear to keep them in the court. So these clever fools, artificial fools, start to make this truth more palatable by making it more humorous. And so many a true word spoken in jest. So the fool became the artificial fool, became the jester, became the joker. And the reason why we use the term joker in resonance, we also use the fool, it's a nuanced, different role, is because of the card in a pack of cards. We have the joker card in a pack of cards. We don't use it. And so we're rather confused about what the card is. We don't really understand the value of that card. We don't even have a name for it other than the joker. It's actually a trump card. It comes from roughly the same time as the medieval courts. Medieval Europe used tarot cards. A lot of the tarot cards were trump cards. I think one was the Pope. And so if you get the Pope, that's it. You're blessed. The whole thing's over. They all consolidate down over the years into what we now know as the pack of playing cards. And there is one remaining trump card, which is the joker. And we don't use it. We find it, or them, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, it depends where you buy your cards from. They're all the jokers. And we put them to one side so we can play our nice, orderly, empirical, strategy-based, I'm clever, I've won game of cards. The bizarre thing is nobody throws them away. They then put them back in the box. Next time they play a game, they've got to get them out. There's no number on the card. We don't know what the value is, and they're not one of the suits. They don't fit. But if you played the game, and this is why we don't play the game, if you, Marco, and I were playing a game of cards, and we've been going for 10, 15 minutes, and both of us were really excited by how good our strategy has been and what our hand is. Mm-hmm. And then I pick up the Joker and say, oh, Marco, the game's over. I've just won. I've just picked up the Joker. Now, you're frustrated and I'm kind of flat as well, because it wasn't through my own merit that I won.
There's no sense.
So actually, playing a game of cards isn't about winning. Playing a game of cards is about this doing at the beginning. It's about how clever we are. We're not bothered about actually solving problems. We're not actually bothered about winning the game of things unless we can show people how clever we are.
And is it also about guessing someone else's moves? And I'd like to branch out to empathy, which makes someone genius. You used Adele's example. How does she know what the audience wants to listen? Does she use empathy, you think? Or as a designer, is that...
As a designer, yes. I mean, the fundamental characteristic of a successful designer is empathy. But empathy is often misunderstood. And so I think it's often confused with sympathy. And so my wife will often say to me, when we have a sort of an argument over the years or something, she'll say, you just don't understand what's going on. You don't understand me. You're not giving me any sympathy. And I say to her, it's worse than that. I do understand you, empathy, and I'm not giving you sympathy. That's my character trait. I'm not a sympathetic person. I don't think people. I'm not on the autistic. I'm not medically on the autistic spectrum, but I think a lot of people there would probably struggle with sympathy because they can't relate to other people in that sort of compassion way. And so, but empathy is I have this really embarrassing trait where I tend to mimic other people's accents. So if a Belgian speaks to me, and I'm not doing it too much today, funny enough, a little bit I am, I can hear myself doing it. I'll speak to you, Marco, in the same way that you're speaking to me. So I'll put on my English accent will become slightly Belgian French accent, and it's really embarrassing. It is a recognized condition. It's called the chameleon effect. And it's a reality of a social species. And it's actually a really positive, strong thing. But it is most easily explained as empathy. And so as a social species, to mimic somebody else is really, really important. And we all tend to do that. If I started doing this, you might naturally do it or whatever. You can't stop. It's just a sort of make you feel comfortable thing, and understand who you are thing. So as a designers should have massive empathy. Now, this goes back to, do you need to go and ask everybody? You see, the problem is most of our things, we've just become machines. And it's all about writing the algorithms for a project where all the people in the project are merely sort of assets that function based on the algorithms. So the Gantt chart says we're going to do this, 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 and this, followed by this, 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 and this. There'll be output data there. We'll go and do that, and off you go. And let me show you a picture. Process. Process is a constant. There are nuances that vary, but how Stone Age man developed the wheel is probably pretty similar to how clever brilliant professor at Brunel resolved some nanoparticle technology issues. Mm-hmm. You've got raw materials, you've got a need, you have a bit of an epiphany, you try something out, you do that, you test it, it doesn't work, you bam, 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 and then eventually you try to sell it to other people. That process doesn't really change. So the process of cooking is you've got to go and either grow or harvest the raw materials, you've got to prepare them, you've got to broadly speaking, let's say heat them, blend them together, heat them up. Of course, the technology might change. So heat it up in a cauldron on a fire, heat it up on a coal fire, heat it up on an electric stove, heat it up in a microwave. But you still don't do the heating up before you've harvested the vegetables. You still don't do the heating up before you've prepared them. And so that process is a constant. Now, what's happened, so when I started my career as a designer, industrial designer, we all were above process. Nobody ever came to us as a design firm. I've worked in several as a young designer and said, what is your design process? Show me how good your process is, and that will determine whether I commission you to design something. They said, are you a designer? Yes. How good are you? Show me. Okay, there. Oh, I like that. You're good. I want something of that quality against my need. And then they would leave us to get on and use process at our discretion, with us being the master of process. About 5, 6 years into my career, things started changing, and then the internet came, and then the World Wide Web came, and then the Adobe Suite came. And all of a sudden, we had this artificial shop window that needed filling. And so and there's other reasons why this happened, and so we filled it with a process diagram. And we claimed it to be fairly unique, but it's not, because it's fairly constant. We alliterated it, so each phase was alliterated. For some reason, everybody tries to alliterate process. I don't know why. I.e., each phase, And so now we're down here. The process is still there, but now the process is there. We solve the problem using process. Here, process solves the problem if we sacrifice and worship it. And so we have all this religious activity, and we sacrifice to process data and post-it notes and insight. And if we feed it enough stuff, it will solve our problem. But of course, process doesn't solve the problem on its own.
And that does kill our originality, which the originality would be you being on top of the process rather than being dominated by the process.
So process has become an idol. It's become a false god. And so I actually think there's going to be a dramatic shift back above process. I think it's a cyclical fashion cycle.
And do we need a Joker in residence for that? I suppose your answer is yes. We need to shake up the rules.
It depends whether you just want to wait and see what everybody else does and copy them and follow the trend, or it's whether you want to be pioneering.
But what about innovation? Innovation is, to be pioneering. So I suppose.
Well, it's not. I would argue it's not.
What is innovation?
The old Department of Trade and Industry defined innovation as the successful commercialization of a novel idea. So therefore, with that definition, it's not actually coming up with a novel idea.
Do you want to put this together with usability and desirability?
Well, if you're going to successfully commercialize something and it's used by humans, almost inevitably success is, so it's going to require this. So I don't know whether you know, but the iPod, as we came to call it, was invented in 1979 by Cade Kramer in the UK, and he took it to market. And the patent drawings are there, he took it to market, nobody bought it. And eventually his own little company had a bit of a boardroom spat, and they were divided as to whether they would maintain the patent costs. And they voted that they wouldn't. The patent lapsed. A guy called Tony Vanell took it to a guy called Steve Jobs, who gave it to a guy called Johnny Ive, and the rest is history. So you could argue, so who achieved innovation? Did Ken Kramer achieve innovation because he got some new, actually it wasn't that new, there was MP3 anyway, but because he got this new thing to market, but nobody bought it. Well, that's not successful commercialization of a novel idea. Did Apple achieve innovation because they took his patent many years later, and boy, were they successful. Now, have Apple achieved innovation with the iPod? Well, legally speaking, no, because it wasn't novel. It was already in the public domain. You could say, if you take time out of the way, they were the one that successfully commercialized a novel-ish idea. the end of the day, it doesn't matter about innovation. What matters is successfully solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that might need novelty. Inevitably, we need to keep learning. We need new science. We need new research. We need to discover new things. How they're applied into the real world, this is something that we've actually been doing a little bit of work at Brunel, with Brunel over the last 2 or 3 years on and off, with a bit of success, but that's for another day, another conversation.
So I have plenty of questions left for you, and I'd like to ask the audience to fire any of questions that I have in the chat right now, while I'm asking my last question to Jim here. So feel free to write in the chat if you have any more questions. I can see Avril mentioned your indicated your email address here, so you guys feel free to get in touch with Jim if you want some disruptive thinking. But you went on with you spoke about language. You were biased by my French accent, and the question is, for success, for innovation, to respond to people's need, do we need to use the same language as them? Do we need to, when we discuss with industry or with funders, us academics, do we need to use an average language, so meet in between? What are your thoughts on that? Are we losing some cutting edge words if we are actually meeting in the middle? What do you think?
So the government recently asked me to speak in their language if they were going to be able to help. An investor recently who wants to establish a fund around the approach that we take to innovation, which again is for another day, said you're going to have to speak our language. The key, of course, is communication. And it doesn't matter whether it's new language or existing language. What's important is whether people understand. Now, the problem is preconception. And so if I came in now into Brunel for the next year as the designer in residence, this would have been a very different conversation. But I'm professionally not a joker. It's the title I give. I am a designer. That's what I'm qualified in. That's what. And so when people say to me, what are you? I say I'm a designer. But if I use designer in residence, and so it's not the words themselves, it's how people interpret them, how it thinks. The funny thing is, you asked me to bring a cup for the thing. This is the boring cup, so but it's got the big bit of tea in. My wife recently has been buying she wanted to find a gift for somebody, and she went on eBay and bought various things. This is a really interesting phenomenon. These are little cups. They're manufactured as a sort of cooperative in Devon. I think they're called Devon Motto Ware or something. Lots of small potteries coming together between about 1850 and 1950, roughly.
Lovely.
But on this particular one, which was the first one I picked, she got a few extras when she bought them on eBay. I don't know whether you can see that. You probably can't. I'm not sure.
Oh, say little, but think much.
Say little, but think much. Do I entirely agree with that? No. But it's got me thinking. Is it think much, or is it think big, or is it the problem I have is I actually think by talking. So I'm not the Rodin thinker in a quiet room. And so my day job and the role actually of the Joker in Residence over the next year is really to eat more easily in pre-COVID times, but well, there'll be that now, of course, drink coffee with people, talk with people, chat. But that's a version of thinking for me. And people sometimes say to me at the end of one of these coffees, they say, oh, I love the way you think. And I say, well, I'm rather disappointed with that response. It's very flattering, thank you, I say. I wish you had said, I love the way I'm thinking as a result of the last hour. Because it really is nothing. I individually are not going to change the world. We collectively are going to change the world. If we think that everything we are doing at the moment is working really well, there is no need to rethink. But if we believe we can improve or the things are not working,
Sure.
we need to think differently, to, quote.
That, which brings me to Avril's question, what do you think your role in a university is, and how do you approach your work in a university, and elaborating on this change the way of thinking of us academics. So inject that little spark which is going to improve their thinking, well, not improve their thinking, but change their thinking, perhaps to be more, to be solving problems better.
So yes, so the role is it sounds dreadful. It's a sort of influence thinking. Hearing myself say that's just horrible. I've never said that before. I'll quote. I've had a stint in residence at UCL with this role, slightly different, nuanced different. Brunel is the first organization that I'm in residence in that has actually contractually written Joker in residence. Everybody else has been, when it gets to the contracts, they're too scared. But it's all broadly the similar role. And so UCL was interesting. Newcastle, where I'm in residence at the moment, university, I did a session. It was different than this. It was a structured session around the actual the model of innovation, and I'll be doing a few more talks over the next few weeks. And Brunel, and they're online and they're Zoom things. And at some point I'll go through that, I'm sure. But this guy wrote a sort of testimonial of the impact of my role. And he said something like, 5 minutes into Jim's talk, I knew this was going to have an impact. By the end of his talk, I knew most of my colleagues would find this incredibly uncomfortable. So what he's done is he self-identified himself as being distinct from, if you like, the mass behavior. So this is going to have an impact with me. I can get it. This is really interesting. But most other people, it's just not going to work. Right.
And we talk about colleagues, and you also have an experience with multiple experiences with students, and students didn't actually like you. But then to the question as to whether these type of sessions should be happening again next year, what have they told you?
So that story is UCL Medical School. A woman heard me at a sort of government event that UCL were holding. It was packed. I was on a panel. I answered some questions, and 3 people came up to me. 2 of them followed up, and 2 of them I remain in touch with. But this particular woman, she's one of the professors there, or one of the teachers at UCL. The 2 women that we followed up with both said, you were the only, the reason why we came to you at the end of this session is that you were the only person in this room speaking the truth. Interesting, truth telling. Anyway, she then says, I would like you to teach my students. So I did a lecture, and this is an undergraduate MSc module in the medical school, women's health cancer, I think, or something. And I had an hour with the students, and then she had a sort of tutorial with them all afterwards. And actually the whole hour afterwards taken up about the content of this session, and not just the content, the actual session itself. And they all hated it. And so she said at the end of the second hour, okay, I'm listening to you, I'm asking, and so I get the message. It was an experiment, but I'm never going to get Jim back in again. No, they said. You must get him back in. And so to the credit of those students, they expressed their discomfort, but recognized the value.
Right, yeah. I think that is important for us at Brunel. We'd like you to also have sessions with students, because it's important for them to be disrupted. Maybe we are not disrupting our students enough, perhaps.
Well, in a sense, because you have a responsibility to satisfy them. I don't. I can sort of speak the truth. I'll tell you another, I'm conscious of time, another little anecdote. Yes. I was in a design firm, and it was a top UK global design firm in London. And we used to always have students coming, and Brunel students and other people coming and doing placements and things. And then out of the blue, this sort of mature student came on a placement. He was probably mid-30s or something. He obviously stepped back from the career. Turns out he was married, had children. And he basically had a big moment in life and decided he needed a career change. And he gave up his job, married with children, and went and paid to study design. And somehow he must have known somebody in the design firm, because he came and he spent a week with us. Absolutely useless. Now, to the extent that most people were sort of laughing behind his back. This is many years ago. My colleagues said to me towards the end of the week, "You've got to go and tell that guy how bad he is." Now, they must have recognized a character trait, even long before I used the term joker and all this sort of stuff. And so I needed to go and tell that student the truth. That you can go down this path, but you are never going to be a world-class designer. And of course, very few people tell people those truths these days. And so, which is one of the reasons why I think the sympathy dial on my character is not high. And the other one is, and really conscious of time, I was asked to read a book recently around the use of psychedelic drugs.
Right.
By a guy who used to head up innovation at Johnson & Johnson's Innovation Lab in London. He was one of the naysayers. He wasn't very interested in what I was doing, but we kept the conversation going, kept it going. He now works for a large UK startup in the medical space, looking at cancer patient pathways. But what they're going to be doing once they get regulatory approval is they manufacture a synthetic psilocybin, which is the active ingredient of magic mushroom, and they are going to intervene in the space between terminal diagnosis and death, for the benefit of the individual's mental health and well-being, and really importantly, all of those people around that person, because some people just get so scared of death. And I don't know whether you know, I know you've got a neuroscience background. You can, under psychedelic drugs, you can take somebody to and through their death. And when you're under the psychedelic state, observing your own death and going beyond your own death, suddenly you realize that death is not the end of the universe, your own death. Now, it doesn't make death less sad and stressful, but it makes your own death less egocentric.
And less unknown as well. You have experienced it.
Less unknown, but I think the key is the egocentricity of it. And psilocybin, the hallucinogenics, have the ability to suppress the default mode network, otherwise called the ego. And one of the weird things is I read the book and it explains all the psychedelic experiences, and it's just every day for me. In fact, I've been through that other side of death experience twice, just in everyday life, in dreams. And I think one of the reasons why I can speak the truth is because I don't particularly feel the need to be liked, because my ego doesn't demand that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so within the complex mix, very complex mix, which I want to learn about, of a medieval court, otherwise called Brunel University, it's going to be fascinating together to see what the influence of a joker is within that court. Now, I will be flat on the floor if we fundamentally change the behavior of Brunel University. What I expect, and from experience, is that there will be individuals and then small collections of people that start to do things differently. And that's where, on the fringes, on the leading edges, the cutting edges, not the mainstream. In fact, I'm detrimental to the mainstream. The mainstream is doing really well getting grant funding and research funding for all sorts of things. Don't come near me.
Mm-hmm.
It's in that cutting edge. It's that, if you like, you know, the innovation edge, the pioneering edge, I think you referred to the word. So what I love from these sort of more public sessions is the opportunity to talk to a range of people. Of course, I haven't got a clue who most of you are. But what I hope is that one or two will come forward. I'm not going to be disappointed that everybody doesn't come forward. In fact, there are probably people on this call who would think I'm a complete nutter and are frustrated and disagree. Well, let's have a conversation if you want, but I don't mind if you don't. But so final, I did a talk to a bunch of students recently.
Final words,
design students, not Brunel. And a woman came up to me afterwards on LinkedIn. And she said, I knew it. I knew there was another world out there that they were not telling us about. I cannot wait to get out of this world into that reality that you have just described. And I said, look, I have to confess, I've just made it up. But I've made it up not to tease you. I've made it up because that is the reality I want people like you to come together and create. And so there's a problem. I can find solutions really easy. That's where we need to put the energy in delivering them.
This is great. Well, thank you very much, Jim, for playing the game today of Brunel Cuppa Science. And thank you for the audience for being there and asking the questions. Jim is very happy to be contacted. Again, Avril has put your email address there, and we look forward to some disruption.
Yeah, and you found me on LinkedIn, so you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
I think you really need to have people who...
Look forward to talking.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.
Cheers, Marco.